All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's climate polling webinar. We are going to give folks just a few moments to enter into the Zoom room, so please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat while we wait, and we will get started shortly. All right. Hi, folks. For those who have just come in, we are waiting just a few moments for the rest of the folks to trickle in, so please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I'm going to give it just another minute or so because I do see lots of participants still coming in. So thanks for your patience. We'll get started real soon. All right, I think now is probably a good time to kick things off. So hello, my name is Jordan Hayden. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm VPIRG's Keep Vermont Cool campaign manager. So I am super thrilled to be here to moderate this afternoon's program. So I hope you're excited as well. I do want to let you know before we get started that this webinar is being recorded and live streamed to our Facebook page. So if you prefer not to be seen in that way, we do welcome you to listen in with your camera off. Now, before we move forward any further, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that many folks joining today are currently residing on traditional unceded Abenaki land. So here at VPIRG, we do acknowledge the Abenaki people as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land, which of course does account for our beautiful rivers, lakes, mountains, trees, and so much more. So if you'd like to learn more or provide support, you can visit the Vermont Indigenous Heritage Center and the Abenaki Arts and Education Center. So with all of that in mind, I'd like to move forward now by sharing just a bit about our agenda. So I'm joined today by Joshua Lowe, the Partnerships Director for the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, and Kevin Hanley, the Analyst for Data for Progress. So in just a moment, I'll pass the mic over to Joshua, who can tell us all about the Global Warming 6 Americas framework and what that can teach us about climate action, not just in Vermont, but all around the country. And then from there, we'll hear from Kevin, who will tell us about the polling work he conducted with VPIRG earlier this year and what he found using that very same framework. So after that, Joshua and Kevin will be happy to answer a few questions, so you can feel free to type those questions into the chat as they come up for you, or you can raise your hand during the designated Q&A time, and we will take you off mute. So I believe that's all I've got on my back end, so I am going to stop screen sharing, and Joshua, I'll let you take it away. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Jordan. I'm excited to be here and join VPIRG. I will give me just a second to share my screen, and it'll take. I will be here and then share. And y'all should be seeing my slides and not my notes, right?
Looks great.
Excellent. Well, I'm so excited to be here today and tell you a little bit about the Global Warming 6 Americas and the work at the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. I got my start in the Public Interest Network as a community organizer, so excited to be reconnected with y'all today. So at the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, or YPCCC, we really do two things. We do research, we do scientific studies on public beliefs, opinions, attitudes, and behavior. We do all sorts of analysis on those things. One of our flagship products is the Climate Change in the American Mind survey, which is a twice yearly nationally representative survey. It covers beliefs and attitudes and also politics. And it's where we get most of the data on the American public. We also do partnerships. So we help advocates build public and political will for climate action, use the tools and insights, and run their own research and experiments. So like I said, I got my start as a community organizer. I started in Memphis, and then realized I needed to learn the skills of community organizing. So joined Green Corps for a while back. And really we were doing two things. We were building public will and political will. And that's a key part of how we think about our research at the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. Public will is public sentiment, activism, or lack thereof. All of the things that go into what does the public think about climate change or another topic. And then political will is what happens in the halls of Congress. You know, sometimes you have a climate champ or opponent that has a lot of sway. All those things go into public will. And so those are useful concepts to think about when you think about the Six Americas and when you think about public opinion more generally. But the first rule of any communication is to know your audience. And a great tool for that in global warming is the Six Americas. Americans don't divide neatly into climate activists or opponents, and they respond to the climate issue in distinct ways. So the Six Americas are the alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. The alarmed are the folks that have the highest belief in global warming. They're the most concerned, most motivated. And then on the other side are the dismissive, which have the lowest beliefs in global warming. They're least concerned and least motivated. And I'll go through the distinguishing factors of each of these groups, but just know that there's this spectrum of where Americans are at on climate change. The alarmed, my guess is that the majority of the folks on this call are probably alarmed. They feel like global warming is real, that aggressive actions are needed. They think that it's a serious threat today to their families and to their communities, and understand the scientific consensus, but they may not know what they can do to take action, and may have never been asked to take action. In fact, there's a good number of these folks that won't even vote unless someone asks them to vote. So there's a good need for civic engagement and organizing. The concerned are similar to the alarm, but they think that global warming is a more distant threat, both in time and space. It may be a problem in 10 years, or it may be a problem in developing countries, but they don't realize that global warming is happening here and now in their communities. They're more moderate politically. The cautious, they're concerned about global warming, but it's a distant threat. It's for future generation. They're less sure about it. They may not know about the scientific consensus. And I've said the scientific consensus a couple times. That's that 97 or 99% of climate scientists agree that global warming is real and happening and human caused. And they're less sure if they can do anything about it. This is a persuasion audience. The disengaged really haven't given it much thought. They may not even know what global warming is. Oftentimes they have multiple jobs, very busy, and they tend to have the lowest education and income levels. They're not very politically aware. The doubtful, they're less likely to believe global warming is happening or human caused. If they think it's real, it's not really something that we need to do anything about. And they're, politically moderate to conservative. And then the dismissive, they're most likely to think global warming is a hoax or a conspiracy. They tend to be very loud, and they might conserve energy, but they're not going to do very much because of global warming. In fact, they might join a campaign against y'all. And so the breakdown of the 6 Americas is that the majority of Americans are alarmed or concerned, with a significant number of people in the cautious and disengaged, and a smaller group of people in the dismissive. In fact, the alarmed outnumbers the dismissive 2.5 to 1. It's the dismissive are just loud. And when you think about how to apply this to your campaign, we think about engaging the alarmed and concerned to organize for power, because they want to know what they can do to address global warming, and then to educate and persuade the concerned, cautious, and doubtful, so that they give you the silent permission and give politicians the silent permission to take climate action. But you saw our numbers of where Americans are at. Not every audience is the same. So we created this tool called the 6 Americas Super Short Survey. There's a quiz on our website where you can take this quiz. It's also useful if you're doing a presentation or doing a statewide survey, as Kevin will talk about in a second. But it's a great way to get a quick sense of where your audience is at. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Joshua. Let me just share my screen here. Can everybody see my slides? Oh, can I see? Yes, sorry about that. So yeah, my name's Kevin Hanley, he, him, his. I'm a polling analyst at Data for Progress, and I recently conducted some climate polling on behalf of VPIRG, in which we used this climate segmentation tool from Yale. And I'd like to share those results with you. So quickly, just to go over the methodology of the survey, from April 17th to 24th, we conducted a survey of 598 likely voters in Vermont using SMS and web panel respondents. We weighted the sample to be representative of likely voters in Vermont by age, gender, education, race, geography, and voting history. And the margin of error is plus or minus 4 percentage points. You can see the map of where most of our respondents came from in Vermont, as well as a demographic breakdown below it. So as Joshua mentioned, we implemented the super short survey, the 4 questions from it, into our poll, and then did segmentation on that. So first I'm going to present the base questions themselves, and then I'll dive into the segmentation results. First 2 questions are, how worried are you about global warming? And how important is the issue of global warming to you personally? And in general, we found intense worry among Vermont voters about global warming. 69% of voters said they were very or somewhat worried about global warming, and 53% report that global warming is extremely or very important to them personally. Notably, only 11% said that global warming was not at all important to them personally, and 16% said they were not at all worried about global warming, which are very, very small numbers, and this certainly impacts segmentation results, as we'll see later. The next 2 questions were, how much do you think global warming will harm you personally? And then how much do you think global warming will harm future generations of people? And we found a stark divide here. Only 40% said that global warming will harm them only a little or not at all. But when we apply that same question to future generations of people, only 21% of people said this. 22% of Vermont voters said that global warming will harm them personally a great deal, whereas 59% said that it will harm future generations of people a great deal. And from this, we can kind of glean that there's certainly a lot of awareness to the issue, and this will be cemented with the segmentation results in a minute. But there is a big disconnect in when this harm is going to happen to voters. So on to the segmentation results. We found that Vermont voters are alarmed about global warming, somewhat unsurprisingly. The vast majority, the plurality of voters, of 44%, in Vermont are alarmed about global warming, and 18% are concerned, 14% are cautious, and only 1% are disengaged. And we found that 11% were dismissive and 12% doubtful. The segmentation revealed stark divides among partisanship and gender, where 74% of Democrats are alarmed, compared to only 10% of Republicans, and 52% of women in Vermont are alarmed, compared to 35% of men. Compared to the national results that Joshua shared before, we find that Vermont voters are very engaged on the topic. We found only 1% were disengaged, which is, I think, is a very notable finding compared to the 7% nationally as of December. And of those people that are engaged, they're most likely to be alarmed. And as Joshua mentioned, this does not necessarily mean that they are electorally active or politically active on the subject, but it really does provide an opening to communicate to these voters and spur action from them, because as these results show, they're very concerned, very motivated by the topic. They just might not be pointed in the right direction of what to do with those sentiments. So those are the results on my end, and I'm happy to take any questions. Stop sharing now.
Well, thank you both so much. That's such useful insight. And as you both know, I'm already very familiar with this framework, but I find that each time I hear more about it, I'm learning and obtaining more information. So it's truly so fascinating. So again, thank you so much for your time. But I'm sure that lots of folks on this call have questions for you. So let's pivot now to our Q&A portion of the program. And as a reminder, folks are welcome to both type questions in the chat or to raise hand using the raise hand function. And wait to be called on. We will unmute for you. So we'll give a minute for those questions to come in. And I'll start by asking, and really this is sort of a question directed for you, Kevin, but I think Joshua, you might have the ability to answer it as well. What did you find most interesting or surprising when digging into the Vermont polling results?
Yeah, happy to lead on that. Now, I think the most surprising result was the lack of disengaged voters. It was really, really surprising to me, especially compared to the national results, that there's really no one that's disengaged in Vermont here. Everybody has an opinion on global warming, and of those people, the negative or the dismissive and apologies, I'm pulling up my tabs here. Dismissive and doubtful voters are about the same as the national numbers, but the alarmed is just far and away the most striking difference between national and state results.
Yeah, and then I would add, looking at Kevin's numbers, if you look at the Republican crosstab, the alarmed, concerned, and cautious adds up to about 53%, and so that tells me that both on the Democratic side, you have a strong mandate for climate action, and that there is at least a persuadable audience on the Republican side, which is, I think, really good news for building that silent permission, especially in a politically unique state like Vermont that has this interesting rural bipartisan tradition.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, we've got a few questions in the chat and we've got a hand raised, so I'm going to try to get through these so we can hit all of them in time. But the first question coming in from the chat is, it's great to have Vermont-specific data. The argument against climate action I hear in Vermont is, 1, it will cost too much to deal with climate change, and 2, what Vermont does won't matter. This is a classic tragedy of the commons, pitting self-interest against the common good. It's just what the large body of values, beliefs, norms, research on environmental decision-making was set up to handle. How does the Six Americas approach speak to this issue? What strategies does it suggest? And have you looked at other parts of the literature?
So we've created some of that literature. And what our partners find is that at combining the cost savings of clean energy, energy efficiency, and the environmental co-benefits, that it oftentimes is a winning message with a large number of people. And if you look at our website, there's a study that shows that leading with cost savings is oftentimes an effective strategy with Republican respondents. In terms of the specific Six Americas, I think if you know where your audience is at, it can help you decide what messages you emphasize. So if somebody is cautious or doubtful, you might lead with that cost savings message. Where if someone is alarmed or concerned, you may emphasize global warming and the global warming benefits more because that is something that they care about. Although combining those messages along with health benefits is oftentimes a winning strategy.
Yeah, and I'll just say on the cost point of that question, this is a very common thread that I found in a lot of climate polling, especially among independents, where in Vermont they outsize both Republicans and Democrats on registration. Cost is often going to be the top issue with a lot of subjects, not just climate change. And so while the framework doesn't really get the specific messaging to address that, the framework is very useful when you're doing message testing to use it to see which messages are effective with which cohorts. Yeah.
Great, thank you. The next question is there any breakout on the data by age?
Yeah, I don't have a chart ready on that, but I can just read off the results. We use a age 2 category, under and over 45, for these results. And here, we found that under 45, 48% were alarmed, and over 45, 42% were alarmed. So there is some discrepancy there, but it's not as large as the gender or partisanship discrepancies, which is why I pointed those out. And then the concerned, cautious, disengaged, and dismissive and doubtful numbers are fairly similar. They're slightly more concerned for the over 45, which is kind of taking away from some of the alarmed numbers. But in general, younger voters are slightly more alarmed than older voters, which isn't much of a surprise on our
Great, thank you. All right, Caleb, I'm going to move over to you. So I'm going to ask to unmute, and you should be able to come off your mic.
Hi, yeah. Thanks for calling.
Caleb, it sounds like we might be having some connection issues. Perhaps you might want to try to come back in, or feel free to type in the chat. Sorry about that.
Okay. Can you?
I think we may have lost him.
Uh,
All right. Hopefully Caleb will come back to us. Matthew, I see your hand up, so I am going to ask for you to unmute.
Yes, greetings everyone, and thank you very much, for taking my question. My question is a big one, and it has to be taken seriously with a grain of salt. The inconsistency of the survey, I did see from one person in the audience mention that most of the survey respondents are from Chittenden County. Is there any other way to make sure that the survey is actually authentic? Because you got other regions that feels like, that are not being represented here. And it ain't just inequality. It's just, how can we bring those other, communities to be involved in this? Because it's going to take everyone to participate, not just the ones that are privileged to do so. Because that's a big thing across the state of Vermont that I see is some counties are privileged to do this and others don't. And is that the message that we're sending to our respondents, across the state of Vermont, that, it's just, this is how it is, this is how it looks, and, for me, it's just, as a person of color, I use he, him pronouns. As a person with disability, this does affect those population. Vermont's an aging demographic state. We got senior citizens that live here. And we gotta, make sure that we're adjusting the participations to the current, individuals that we're trying to attract about these problems. Because it's like, for me, it's more about, trying to actually connect the dots right here for the climate change solutions. We are the solutions to those, problems, but it takes all hands on deck to come up with a great recommendation and solution together. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. On the county aspect, so we await the survey based off of likely voters in the upcoming election. Chindawn County being the most populous, at 26.5% of our sample is from that county. So essentially 75% of the sample is not from that county, and they are spread out across the counties in Vermont. We have representation from every county in Vermont, though with the sample size this large, in terms of results, we're only able to report on that main populous county. In terms of the other representation factors, again, we weight this survey based off of likely voters in the upcoming election. And so that includes targets for age, gender, education, race, and geography, and past vote history to make sure that we're getting a good amount of political diversity in the survey. If we were to use something more like an adult weight, where we're not looking at likely voters, we're just looking at the demographics of the state in general, these county breakdowns would probably look different because you're more likely to vote in urban areas. And actually, there was a question in the chat that mentioned a urban versus rural breakdown. That's a very good point. We didn't include that in this set of data, but that's something we can look into, certainly, because we have that data. We just don't have it readily available right now. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. And I'll just add, Matthew, you have a great question, and I appreciate the perspective. Kevin, I think, did a good job of explaining why they chose their weighting. I would just add that Pew Research has a great explainer course on their website about how polling works, and it includes more information about weighting, which is a complicated statistical thing that I definitely don't understand as well as Kevin does. So I would encourage you, I'll drop that link in the chat so you can check it out and learn more about that methodology.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we are running short on time, but there are a few really good questions I'd like to get to, so hopefully we can do those super quickly. The next question in the chat says, can you speak to how alarm or concern impacts expectations of citizens? For example, to what degree do alarmed and concerned Vermonters expect government to lead on taking action?
Yeah, so in our results, we didn't ask those specific questions, which would really be the best way to get at this. The survey used the segmentation for a few different purposes, but it wasn't really looking at the expected government action on this. So I don't want to speak to that just because I don't want to say anything that hasn't been backed up by data. Though I will say, as Joshua kind of mentioned in his overview of the Six Americas categories, the alarm voters are very open to a personal action and government action. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are doing that yet. And so I think a key factor here is communicating to those voters and giving them calls to action, because they are the most likely to kind of pick up the reins, so to speak there.
And we have a tool called the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. It's based on nationally represented survey data and uses a process called MRP to downscale and estimate climate opinion at the local level. And you can check out the questions around who the public wants to take action, and that may give you some sense of where they are at in terms of the local government is your governor, is it Congress, or corporations or individuals.
Great, thank you. And because Caleb was able to make their way over to the chat, we're going to close on this question. So thanks so much for your patience, Caleb. So many people are just responding based on their general anxiety. Young people and women have more social pressures in the society and therefore would be even more generally concerned, even if they don't understand global warming. Now, folks in Bangladesh, for instance, may not understand global warming, yet millions of their country folk have been displaced due to flooding. Hypothetically, they might not care about the concept of global warming, but care very much about preventing flooding. How do we utilize the results about people to make certain statements about active engagement and progress?
Yeah, so I think an important factor in the Vermont results is, and I touched on this earlier, but the lack of disengaged. It was A, very striking to me, and B, really shows that in Vermont, at least, voters are aware of global warming, and almost everybody, only 1% were disengaged, have thoughts and opinions on this issue. Now, people who are dismissive and doubtful are clearly have different opinions about global warming than the other side. But with the plurality of people being alarmed, I think we can utilize the results in terms of focusing campaigns and messaging more on the alarmed and concerned side, because you're really not going to break through to a lot of the dismissive and doubtful people because they already have their opinions made up on this. And so it'd be much more useful to try to prod action from those people who are already kind of on our side, but may not know what to do or may not be particularly engaged in terms of the cautious people who are concerned about climate change and are motivated by it, but are just not really as polarized as others.
Great. Well, thank you so much all for taking a few extra minutes with us this afternoon and for asking your questions. And of course, thank you so much to Kevin and Joshua for sharing your wonderful expertise. So I hope you all found this to be beneficial. And of course, we will follow up with the materials and the recording. And if you have any questions, you will have my email. So thanks so much for taking the time. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.